Welcome back to the weekend here on Sports Radio 910. It's that time again. Time for our weekly wildlife conversation. Welcome back in for the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, Chris Dunnavant. And Chris, normally at this time we're going to talk fishing, but when you can get a guy like a Bob Duncan, for instance, to come in studio with you, it's okay to maybe take a break from talking fishing and, I don't know, maybe talk turkeys.
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk turkey today. We've got our executive director, Bob Duncan, in. Kind of a spring gobbler season preview today. Bob is an experienced turkey hunter, and he's brought an assortment of calls and things that he uses for his turkey hunting. So it's good to have Bob in here today. Welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and if folks are wondering how it's been the rest of the day today, the spring youth Gobbler Day is open today, along with some very special areas for trout fishing. So there's a lot of neat things out there for folks to do, and there's still time to do that. So again, we're glad to be with you and talk a little turkey today.
Of course, anybody who's been following along with the show back to the beginning, Bob was on with us at the beginning of December. I think everybody probably remembers Who Cooks for You.
Oh, they do. They did. That's right. It's amazing that people came up and said something to me after that. Folks in a lot of different parts of the state as well. And what we were talking about there was one of the major techniques for turkey hunters. I mean, when you go out early in the morning, if you were out early this morning, sometimes the turkeys gobble on a voluntary basis, and sometimes they're not as inclined to. And when they're not as inclined to gobble, then hunters use what are called various locator calls, and the barred owl call is certainly one of those that will sometimes cause the gobbler to answer back. And other times it's a crow call, and I brought a crow call. We'll try that in a minute. There's any number of calls. There's a pileated woodpecker call that people use. Some people use the peacock calls in certain areas. In
Wow.
western part of the country, people use coyote yelpers and make a coyote howl or something, and they'll gobble at that. So a lot of times just a loud noise will get a gobbler to respond back. And it's really interesting because in doing some preseason scouting, I was in the woods the other day, and there were some hens roosted. And, of course, hens tend to be very quiet, whereas the gobblers are, I don't know, maybe that's like a lot of other things. But the hens are being a little more demure. And they do things called tree calls. They have these little quiet calls. And I thought I would because I had a conversation with them. I actually thought I was talking to one, and then two or three more chimed in. But it's just some soft calling that's not very loud, and it's not meant to cause the gobbler to come in. But a tree call is something like this. Not very loud at all. They're letting each other know where they are. They made it through the night. They're just perched up in their trees, and they roost at nighttime. They roost in the evening before, and then fly down in the morning. And then when they get ready to fly down, now of course there may be a gobbler that gobbles while this is all going on, but the hens never get too excited on the tree until they fly down, and then they do what's called a fly down cackle. And this call can sometimes get a gobbler excited, so a lot of hunters will use the fly down cackle sometimes if a gobbler's hung up in the tree. And one of the techniques is not to call to that gobbler a lot on the tree, because as long as you're talking to him, he's likely just to sit there on a limb and gobble back at you. They want the hens to come to them anyway, but this is the fly down cackle from a hen. They make that little excited cackle as they fly off the limb, and of course you'll hear their wings beating as they fly down, and then a lot of times the gobbler will come right back and gobble at that, and usually he's not too far behind the hens coming down on the ground, and then that's when the real fun begins for everybody. And of course, if you're, again, in turkey hunting, you're really working against the normal order of business, because a hunter is trying to imitate a hen turkey and call the gobbler to him. In the real world, the gobbler is literally the boss gobbler, and he establishes his little territory, his strutting area, and one thing or another. And the most common practice is for the hens to come to the gobbler. He gobbles. That's his way to signal the hens to come to him. There's a dominance thing there. It's the most dominant gobbler that has the hens approach him. And so the hunter is really acting against that, trying to entice the gobbler away. And so they'll use a variety of turkey calls. They may use the fly down cackle to try to get them excited, or most of the time they're just doing some yelping. And I'll do some yelping on this, and I'm using what we call a diaphragm call or a mouth yelper. And I've got box calls and other calls here in front of me, slate calls and one thing and another. But when you're trying to call a gobbler in, what you're trying to do is just yelp a little bit like an old hen, and typically it'll sound something like this. And this is a raspy old hen. There are different sounds from different turkeys. I don't think any two of them sound exactly alike. Now, occasionally, when a hen gets really excited, she'll start doing what we call cutting. She'll start moving her head around in different directions. She's looking for that gobbler. She's looking for some other turkeys. And this cutting is something that'll really get a gobbler excited. And usually they'll gobble back at it if they're anywhere inclined, any way close to being inclined. But the cutting of a hen turkey is like this. She's saying, I'm over here, guys, come over here. I'm all excited, come over here. And so, those are some of the different calls. There's some things you can do. Again, there's any number of types of calls that can be used in turkey hunting. A lot of people prefer, probably the thing that started it all, except for Native Americans, I'm sure they use some different kinds of reeds and things. But the box call has probably been one of the oldest calls around. There were box calls made in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the Lynch box call is probably the most famous one of the box calls. But they're a pretty standard-looking thing, and they make it just a standard kind of a call. It's kind of a yelp of a hen turkey. That one could use a little chalk on it this morning. But if we'd had it out earlier this morning, we would have chalked it up good and it would have had a little better sound to it. And then there are slate calls, and slate calls have been an awfully popular call. And let's try this one. And slate calls are awfully versatile. One of the particularly popular calls is a little cluck and then a purr. And that's got a pretty nice sound to it. And then also you can do what's called cutting, like I was doing with the diaphragm call. You can actually cut on some of these. That's that excited hen calling again. And for me, I think probably the most challenging one to do, and a lot of times the reason the diaphragm calls are so popular is it leaves your hands free. And you don't want to be moving a box call or moving some of these other calls when a gobbler's coming in, because the challenge of hunting the wild turkey, especially the eastern wild turkey, is they have exceptional eyesight, they have exceptional hearing, and it's often been said by my fellow turkey hunters that if a turkey had a sense of smell, we'd never be able to harvest one because they're just that wary. But they can see a movement, and that's why people wear camouflage. That's why they remain motionless. They have to, in many cases, they sit in a blind. So if you're using a call that requires hand movement, you need to be very careful about how you do that. And that's why the diaphragm calls have been so popular. But for me, one of the hardest calls to do is to do a cluck and a purr with a diaphragm. And forgive me, I've got this diaphragm in my mouth. I'm going to try that for you. Sometimes you can't always purr with that thing in your mouth. One of the things, let me go back to the crow call. This is the locator call, and a lot of times if a gobbler's not answering or you don't encounter a gobbler, you pick up and move to a new location. Many a time I've been walking through the woods and say, well, let's just stop and try the crow call, and you try it, and a gobbler answer right back, and you know you got to sit down and start calling like a hen turkey. And the louder the better on the crow calls, but we'll go a little less loud. And that'll usually get them. And there's a natural competition between turkeys and crows. They don't. I've seen them dive. I've seen crows dive at turkeys, and wow. Turkeys gobble back at them in defiance almost. I mean, they just don't get along. So anyway, we've been talking about these gobblers. Let's make a gobbler call, and there are several gobbler calls out there. Most of them are tubes that you shake. There's some old types that have a membrane that you blow across, and they're very difficult to blow, I think. But there's some newer calls out on the market now, And I think it was actually some guys that did some waterfowl and goose hunting that developed this. This is just a wooden call that you blow, and I think it's got a pretty neat sound. And so far, it seems that the birds have been interested in it. I've already called in one gobbler with this, just playing around with it. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And the reason that a hunter might use a gobbler call, realizing you're trying to call a gobbler, is I mentioned when it comes to wild turkeys, dominance is an important thing, and they don't take kindly to competition and intruders. So if they hear another gobbler, a lot of times they'll not only answer it, but a lot of times they'll come to chase them out of their territory. So jealousy enters into it when the business of the eastern wild turkey and spring mating season is on. So I'm going to do a couple of gobbles on this new gobbler call. This one happens to be called a Hank gobbler call. It's something that just came out recently. I know I stopped in Green Tops one day, and they said, we just got back from the SHOT Show, and we have a turkey call, Bob, you don't have because it's brand new. I said, well, go get me one. I got to try it. It was embarrassing. When I took it home, I couldn't get a sound out of it until I actually played with it for a while. But this is the gobbler call. Anyway, you kind of get the idea. You can blow on it and make a gobble sound. And again, I think in some cases that's what you're going to use to close the deal with some of these big gobblers who maybe they're not going to come to a hen. They may be henned up. One of the neat things about this season is the spring is so early this year. Although we've had some very warm days and we've had some more seasonably cool days. But leaf out, the dogwoods are blooming. I've been all over the state. Redwoods have been in bloom for a while. Sarvisberry or shadbush, as folks in different areas call it, is in bloom. The season is on us. Gobblers have been gobbling for a while. So I would encourage folks, if they want to get out there for the Youth Day today, to get out there this afternoon. It's all day long for this special day for youngsters 15 and less. And the one thing that I wanted to emphasize to everybody, Anthony, is that when you're turkey hunting, because you are in camouflage, you need to be very mindful and have a lot of what we call situational awareness. When you're working a turkey, it's easy to get excited. It's quite a show when you see one of these gobblers come strutting in and they're gobbling and doing the things that they do. But the one thing we want to remind everybody is that it's safety first. There's nothing in the woods or waters of Virginia that's worth anybody getting hurt over. Whether you're trout fishing, you want to be safe. If you're boating, folks are out catching herring and shad, and stripers are already running in the James. I mean, this is a grand time to be out of doors. But we want people to, first off, know their targets, know what they're shooting at, make sure that it's a legal turkey. It has to have a beard. So that means not only knowing that it's a turkey, identifying it as a turkey, but then what kind of turkey is it? Is it a hen turkey? She's not legal. If it's a gobbler or a bearded hen, then they're legal. So not only knowing what they're shooting at, but also thinking about what's beyond that turkey. Is there a farmer's cow back behind it? Is there a residential area, on across the fence or something? Being very mindful of what their target is and where they're shooting, the direction they're shooting in, and that sort of thing is very critical. Being very responsible is another thing. Only hunt where you have permission to be. You may not be aware of other hunters in the area if you're in a place where you're not supposed to be. Most folks do a very good job of coordinating their plans with each other if they're on hunt club lands or a lot of the places that allow turkey hunting, people kind of coordinate with each other and they know where they're going. But it's important for the individuals to be very responsible about their activities and to hunt ethically. That's something that's very important to the future of our sport, for all hunting, turkey hunting included. And then, of course, have fun. It's not just about shooting a turkey. It's about getting out there, enjoying. This is a great time to be in the woods. There's all kinds of things to see and listen to. It's a wonderful time of the year. And just to get out there, especially with turkey hunting, maybe not so much so, although trout fishermen like to get out early too. But it's not unlike a lot of other things. You want to get there early to get a good seat. So if you're too late getting in the turkey woods, you can miss a lot of the action. That's not to say that you can't harvest turkeys on up in the morning and all day long. If the season allows all day hunting, you can. But a big part of the show is listening to all those birds gobble in the morning and then trying to figure out a strategy for going after them. I've probably seen more turkeys called in late morning because that's after the gobblers have already been with some hens first thing, and then they may go off looking for more hens. And then later in the season, as the season goes on, more hens are sitting on the nest incubating eggs. And so there's not as many hens for those gobblers to find, and they're a little more susceptible to coming to a call. So, again, there's a lot of fun to be had by being out there. And, again, we just want everybody to be safe, be responsible, and have fun.
Another Sports Radio 910 exclusive with Bob Duncan from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. You're not going to get this on the radio anywhere else, folks. And Chris, I don't know anywhere else where you can hear the phrase raspy hen and also hear somebody talk about a conversation that they had with hens, and it'd be socially acceptable. There are not too many places that you can get away with that.
It's perfectly normal, and I tell you, if as Bob was doing those calls, if you just closed your eyes, you actually could imagine that there's all kinds of wildlife here in the studio with us this morning. It was really something.
Yeah, I forgot to send a memo to everybody here in the Clear Channel building that this was going to be going on, so hopefully the soundproofing in the studio was enough to not make too many people concerned this morning. Chris, before we close out the segment, obviously very much worthy of dedicating time to the turkey season, but don't want to leave out some important fishing stuff going on as well.
Well, and Bob mentioned it earlier, but and I've talked to some folks this week. I have not had a chance to go out yet, but apparently the shad fishing is just hot. They're thick up there, and people are just catching them. There's lots of boats out there. But, folks, don't let a lot of boats out on the river dissuade you from going out. Go ahead, get right out there, find your place in the river, anchor up. There are plenty of fish to be caught, so go out there and enjoy it. And also, Bob mentioned the Heritage Day. It's kind of a ceremonial opening day of trout season as it was in a former time. But especially up at Graves Mountain Lodge, it's a really great opportunity to head up there, take your kids, get some good food, enjoy some good fishing, and they have all kinds of vendors and educational opportunities and also some giveaways for the kids. So it's still not too late to head on up there for the day and enjoy an afternoon at Graves Mountain Lodge.
And looking forward to next week, Chris. The guests keep on coming.
That's right. We do. We've got Bo Beasley, a famous fly fisherman. He's going to talk about the Virginia Fly Fishing Festival and share some of his fly fishing knowledge. And so that's something to really look forward to, so please tune in next week.
Chris, Bob, thank you guys so much for taking the time. Pleasure as always, Bob. I know you're a really busy guy, so really do appreciate it.
This is great fun, Anthony. Thanks for having us here.
Bob Duncan, Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. Truly our weekly wildlife conversation here on the weekend with Anthony Opperman. Stay tuned. Game plan for the weekend coming up.